Every afternoon in the children's section of City Library, the same elderly man would quietly organize books. Children knew him simply as the Bookman. For 12 years he had volunteered there, never speaking much, always working in silence, until 8-year-old Emma asked him about Mars, and his answer left the entire library speechless. City Library's children's section was always bustling in the afternoons. Kids doing homework, parents reading stories, teenagers studying for exams. But one figure moved through it all like a gentle ghost, an elderly man with kind eyes and weathered hands. Robert Chen was 67 years old, with silver hair and a quiet demeanor that put children at ease. Every day at 2 p.m., he'd arrive with the same small backpack, put on his volunteer badge, and begin his work. Organizing books, helping children find what they needed, cleaning up after story time. The children loved him. They called him Uncle Robert, or simply the Bookman. He never raised his voice, never seemed impatient, always had time for anyone who needed help. But he rarely talked about himself. For 12 years, Robert had followed the same routine. He'd start with the picture books, making sure each one was in its proper place. Then he'd move to the elementary section, the science books, the adventure stories. Every book had its home, and Robert made sure they found their way back. The librarians appreciated his dedication. "He's our most reliable volunteer," said Sarah, the head children's librarian. "Rain or shine, he's here." The kids adore him, but he's always been private about his life. Robert preferred it that way. When children asked what job he used to have, he'd simply say, "I worked with numbers and machines." When they asked about his family, he'd smile and redirect the conversation back to books. But Robert had his favorite section, the science books, especially the ones about space. Emma Rodriguez was 8 years old and fascinated by everything beyond Earth's atmosphere. She'd check out the same astronomy books week after week, dreaming of rockets and distant planets. Her favorite topic was Mars, the red planet that seemed so mysterious and exciting. That Tuesday afternoon, Emma was struggling with her school science project about Mars. She had questions that the books couldn't quite answer in words she understood. She'd watched Uncle Robert carefully organizing the space books, and something told her he might be able to help. "Uncle Robert," she said quietly, approaching with her notebook, "can I ask you something about Mars?" Robert looked up from the books he was shelving. "Of course, Emma. What would you like to know?" "My teacher said we might send people to Mars someday, but how do they know where Mars will be when the rocket gets there? It's moving, right?" Robert paused, his hand still on the book spine. The question was more sophisticated than most adults realized. For a moment, his eyes seemed to focus on something far beyond the library walls. "That's an excellent question," Emma Roberts said, sitting down beside her. "You're absolutely right. Mars is moving. In fact, it's traveling around the sun at about 24 kilometers per second. Emma's eyes widened. That was faster than her math could handle. "The trick," Robert continued, "is something called a Hohmann transfer orbit. Imagine you're trying to throw a ball to someone who's running. You don't throw it where they are. You throw it where they're going to be." He picked up a piece of paper and began sketching. Earth and Mars are like two runners on a track, but Mars is on the outside lane, moving slower. We have to time the launch perfectly so that when our spacecraft gets to Mars's orbit, Mars is there waiting for it. Sarah, the librarian, had stopped her work to listen. Other children began gathering around. Robert's explanation was clearer than anything they'd heard before. "But how do you know exactly when to launch?" Emma asked. Robert smiled. "You calculate something called a launch window. For Mars, it only happens about every 26 months when the planets align just right." "How do you know all this?" asked Tommy. a 10-year-old who'd joined the group. Robert hesitated. He'd been careful for so many years, keeping his past private. But looking at these curious young faces, something inside him shifted. Because, he said quietly, I helped calculate those launch windows. I was part of the team that sent the first successful rover to Mars. The children stared at him in stunned silence. Sarah dropped her stack of books. You mean you worked for NASA? Emma whispered. Robert nodded slowly. For 30 years, I was a mission trajectory engineer. My job was to figure out exactly how to get spacecraft where they needed to go. Were you there when the Mars rover landed? Tommy asked, breathlessly. Pathfinder, 1997, Robert said, his voice gaining strength. July 4th. I was in mission control at JPL when Sojourner, that's what we called the rover, took its first pictures of the Martian surface. Why didn't you ever tell us? Emma asked, her voice full of wonder. Robert looked around at the circle of children, their faces bright with curiosity and excitement. When I retired, I wanted a quiet life. 30 years of calculating trajectories for billion-dollar missions, worrying about every decimal point. It was wonderful work, but very stressful. He gestured around the library. Here, I could still help people learn and explore, but without the pressure. Books don't have launch deadlines. What was the coolest thing you worked on? Asked Sophia, a 12-year-old who'd been listening intently. Robert's eyes lit up. We sent a helicopter to Mars in 2021. Ingenuity, it was called. The first powered flight on another planet. I helped plan its flight paths. The children were completely captivated. Even some parents had stopped to listen. Do you think I could work at NASA someday? Emma asked. Robert looked at her notebook, filled with her careful drawings of Mars and rockets. Emma, you're already asking the right questions. That's how every space mission starts, with someone curious enough to ask how and why and what if. Word spread quickly through the library, then through the community. The quiet volunteer who'd been organizing books for 12 years was a real NASA engineer who'd helped send robots to Mars. But Robert didn't want to be treated differently. He continued his volunteer work, still arriving at 2 p.m., still organizing books with the same care. The difference was that now, children sought him out not just for help finding books, but for answers to their biggest questions about space. Sarah approached him a week later. Robert, would you consider starting a science club? The kids can't stop talking about Mars trajectories and launch windows. Robert smiled. I'd like that, but I have one condition. It has to be about encouraging their questions, not just giving answers. 3 months later, the library's Space Explorers Club had a waiting list. Every Saturday, Robert would lead a group of young minds through the wonders of space exploration. They built model rockets, calculated orbital mechanics with simplified math, and dreamed about the missions they might plan someday. Emma, now his star pupil, had decided she wanted to be a mission planner like Uncle Robert. I want to figure out how to get people to Mars, not just robots, she told him. Then you'll need to study hard, Robert said. Math, physics, engineering, but most importantly, never stop asking questions. Looking at these eager young faces, Robert realized he'd found his most important mission yet. For 30 years, he'd helped send machines to explore other worlds. Now he was helping prepare the next generation of explorers to follow them. Sometimes the most valuable knowledge isn't locked away in classified files or corporate boardrooms. Sometimes it's quietly organizing books in a library, waiting for a curious 8-year-old to ask the right question. Robert Chen had traveled millions of miles through space via the trajectories he calculated. But his greatest journey was the short walk from the space books to where Emma sat, notebook in hand, ready to dream about Mars.